coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way podcast. I'm Kate.
And I'm Laura. We're not a Taylor Swift podcast, but here at the Gilmore Way, we are Swifties and have even done several episodes telling the stories of Lorelai and Rory through Taylor's lyrics. So when I heard about Taylor Swift by the book, the literature behind the lyrics, from fairy tales to tortured poets, I knew I had to get a copy ASAP. And why are we doing another Taylor episode? Because this is our channel and we make the rules.
Yeah. Being a Swiftie is a lifestyle. It's a religion. It's a cultural moment. And it's more than bubblegum pop. Rory is one of pop culture's most notorious avid readers, and I feel like Taylor is now being added to that list in her own right. So the fact that a lot of Gilmore fans are also avid readers and Swifties, this feels like a perfect synergy. And I love that there's a book out there that treats Taylor like a relatively serious subject with a little space for some humor, but is also accessible, and it teaches you something. It's edutainment. But, much like we think Gilmore Girls is a serious study of subject worthy of our analysis and admiration, we feel that way about Taylor too. And so this book really was like a joining of the worlds for us.
Yep, indeed. If you have not picked up a copy of it already, here's what it looks like. It is available on the Penguin House website. You can also get it on Amazon or at Target or any major reseller of books. We cannot recommend this to you enough. We also just wanted to shout out the authors, Rachel and Tiffany, but as well as some other people who worked on this behind the scenes. Cover art was by Bethany Mannion and cover design by Alyssa Flanagan, who did an extraordinary job because this is just beautiful from start to finish.
Yeah. So I love how it starts. It's, "Dear reader, welcome to the classic literature meets pop music party of your dreams. The friendship bracelet supplies are on the kitchen table. The chai sugar cookies are in the oven, and we will be having breakfast at midnight." So, it brings you right into the vibe, the atmosphere. And so Rachel is an English professor who loves quoting lyrics in her class. Tiffany is an actor and singer who's been a devoted Swiftie since she met Taylor at a concert at age 15. And, they have so many incredible things to say about Taylor Swift's lyrics and just the interesting combination of their backgrounds and their worlds and their thoughts on the subject really come through in this book and in the conversation that we had with them that we're about to show you here. So we hope you enjoy.
And we also just wanted to very quickly give a warm thanks to Scott McLean at Quirk Books for hooking us up with an advanced read copy. So thank you so much for that. If you're wondering what this book is about, continue to stay tuned because we will have the authors come on with us in a minute. But just a synopsis from the back of the book. From a Robert Frost poem on her debut album to the myth of Cassandra on the Tortured Poets Department, Taylor Swift's lyrics are filled with literary connections. So make sure you're catching them all. Again, with this expert's guide to the novels, poems, and plays that influence her songwriting.
Yeah. All right. And on that note, without any further ado, here's Tiffany and Rachel.
Hi, Tiffany and Rachel. Thank you so much for being here with us today. How are you doing? How's your day so far?
It is so beautiful out here in Denver, so I'm doing great after tons of freezing weather. To have the sunshine is delightful. How are you?
We're doing well. Just so excited to have you on board for this. And we just want to kick things off by having you introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, your profession, and then we'll get to the book.
I can start. I'm Tiffany Tatreau. I'm an actor in the musical theater world. Currently on tour with The Beautiful Noise, the Neil Diamond musical. Today we are in Greensboro, North Carolina, and tomorrow we'll be in Atlanta, Georgia. So it's been a really fun whirlwind. And that's kind of me. Rachel?
And I'm Tiffany's sister-in-law, Rachel Feder, and also co-author. I'm an English professor at the University of Denver.
What an interesting synergy to come together to write a book about Taylor Swift. How did that come up? Was this sort of like a cocktail hour one-off that turned into a real project? Was it around the family dinner table? How did the idea for this spring forth and manifest?
Mm-hmm. So when Taylor Swift announced Tortured Poets, Tiffany texted me right away, like, this is for you, it's for you. And I was so excited. And the whole next day I was chatting about it, about, the concept and the title with my students. And then we all decided that a tortured poets class should be in the cards, which was also a very fun thing that came out of the announcement for me. And then I emailed back and forth a bit with our wonderful editor, Jess Zimmerman at Quirk Books, who I had worked with previously on my book, The Darcy Myth. And after we had a call about kind of what might a Swifties Guide to Tortured Poets look like, I basically called Tiff and was like, help, please. I said, do you want to write a book with me? Something like that. And then it just really snowballed and came together very quickly. And I was already a Swiftie, but I had not done a deep dive. And I got to do just like completely nerd out in that book girly way that I so enjoy. And I had the perfect professor of Swiftie studies along for the ride with me.
Yeah, I think it was a perfect, it just kind of came up and through looking at it with this tortured poets lens, it kind of snowballed, as Rachel said, from like, oh yeah, it's just gonna be this like, it's gonna be short, it's gonna be simple, and it turns out no, it's not. It became so much bigger. I think it's twice as long as we expected it to be. We just kept asking for more pages until we couldn't have any more pages, and we could have kept going. So it was we really had a great time.
Yeah, and our wonderful team at Quirk was just really encouraging and generous and let us write about the whole discography. So our goal was to get everything drafted up until Tortured Poets. And then we had, was it 2 weeks after the album came out to write that section? And so, the album dropped and then it was a double album. And then we were just processing. I mean, it's every literary critic's dream, like processing it in real time, just diving in, finding all the allusions and the references. And it had even more than we expected. And based on the track list, that's really saying a lot.
Yeah, she has so many songs. The fact that it's twice as long as you intended does not surprise me in the slightest. Especially with that double album drop. That's crazy that you only had 2 weeks to do that.
Yeah, I personally was enamored by how comprehensive this was. And I have to shout you out for that all day, because when I heard about the book, it was one thing to kind of wrap my headspace around what to expect. But then when I actually started reading it, I was like, these women did their homework. I am so here for this, and just the research that you put into it. And I want to talk a little bit more about that as well, because Tiffany, I'm sure a lot of the research from this book came from you being a Swiftie and just having that experience, knowing her songs and her music already. But how did you prepare for it? And Rachel, as a literary professor, what was your research project and like in terms of what you had to do to put it all together, especially in that short time space?
We started out really going together chapter by chapter and just looking at a sheet of the lyrics as if they were poetry. Like, just like, here's the text. Where do we begin? Here's the text to every single song in this album and every single vault track or bonus track that's ever seen the light of day. And we started kind of going through and we would mark up, oh, that kind of, doesn't that sort of sound like the plot to this? Or isn't this narrative almost something like an allusion to that? And that's kind of where we began. And because we were going chapter by chapter chronologically, we didn't exactly go in album order. We kind of bounced back and forth. But once you kind of started to pull a thread on one album, sometimes that meant that our research led us to going back to a chapter we thought we were done with and saying, oh, now I see this actually from a bird's eye view. These things are connected. And so we both kind of would, divvy up what we found and go away and come back and chat about it and see what the other one had to add to it as we went along, which, sometimes led to more pages because you found things out that you didn't know were there, 3 weeks ago when you started.
Yeah, we had a lot of bases covered also in terms of kind of general areas of knowledge and interest. So I work on kind of 18th and 19th century British literature. I think a lot about the rise of the novel, the history of the Gothic. I think a lot about poetry and poetic experiment. Tiffany knows a ton about drama and the history of theater, and was really, that was such an education for me also to pull those threads with her. And then our wonderful editor, Jess, also had such a bird's eye view of the whole project, and has such a kaleidoscopic knowledge of literature as well. And so was constantly kind of spotting things. Other members of the team also were, Rebecca, another one of the editors at Quirk, sent us sort of her list of all of the illusions that she just had, like a mental map from her years as a literary Swiftie. So it was a team effort for sure, and just such fun to connect all those dots.
Yeah, lots of fans do some of that work, but you guys pulled out things that I had never seen anybody say. And it was just so many light bulbs going off, and that's kind of what made reading it so much fun.
Thank you so much for reading it.
Yeah, no, I can also just echo like the pinging that I think my brain was doing, because I've read a lot of those novels as well as you go through high school humanities courses. So you're familiar with the literary work, but then just correlating it to Taylor Swift's lyrics, it's things that you would have never thought of or thought to experience or envision within what she does and what these authors have done. And it was just the best brain exercise, I think, also to be able to go through the book and just learn so much about it too, and just have so much more knowledge that I was enveloping.
I'm so happy to hear that.
It really is a fun way to start listening, especially if you've listened for a long time and you know the songs. And then once I found that my brain was in this mode, then you don't stop hearing it. Once you're thinking about it, you start saying, hey, what about this? And what about this? And finally, Jess was like, you guys have to stop. The book is due. We're done.
Yeah, I don't think a comprehensive top to bottom treatment is even possible with everything. It would be, it'd be longer than War and Peace. But I think you guys did a great job capturing like some of the best and all of the connections across them. And I mean, this might be skipping ahead a little bit, but back in November, you guys also put on Taylor Swift by the Book in concert. And you even did things like mashing up songs together that brought together those threads that you were able to pull. And I was just gobsmacked at some of the combinations that you guys came up with. Can you talk about how some of that came about?
It really came from as we were writing and putting together the playlists and those little motif sections throughout the book of like, wow, look at how, something we look at in musical theater certainly is little things that tie songs together and tie that story together, and maybe even act as like a reprise later on to something that happened earlier. And I think that was a great joy for me to see how it kind of mirrored that kind of writing if you really looked at it from the bird's eye view of the full discography. And so it was wonderful to get to put it on its feet and celebrate the music in the way it's meant to be heard, knowing what we know now, and getting to share that with, many, many wonderfully talented artists. It was just such a blast.
Yeah, it was the best thing ever. And Tiffany is 100% to thank for all of it. I was, it's completely out of my world and my, ability to, my understanding of how things get made in the world, and just coming in and seeing just so many beautifully talented, passionate people who were there to celebrate the book with us and the music with us, and just bringing really a group together in celebration and having that sort of ephemeral, that moment in conjunction with the book was really just beyond my wildest dreams.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. I will say also too, Tiffany, it was just so delightful to see your husband also get involved and just, do that musicality along with you. Can you talk a little bit about his experience with that, what his support has meant to you and been like, and just, maybe Rachel for you as well, like what it's like to just have a partner be involved and what their support system was like as you were going through this entire orchestration?
Yes, and also Tiffany's husband is my brother. We've made that connection too, right? like the best thing.
So he brought us together.
Thanks, Jack, good job.
And then, we kind of said, okay, thanks for doing that. Now we're going to go talk on the phone nonstop for a couple months and, be FaceTiming to the point where he would have to ask one of us how the other one was doing, because that was really the only time, but he was a huge support, and he, gave the book a really solid read. I think he was just like so instrumental in making the thing, not only in emotionally supporting both of us through it, and also physically, supporting in this space of, I'll proofread that again, or if you want me to look something over, like he's just always, on our team in a really special way.
Yeah, it's really incredible. There was a moment when I didn't take his call and I texted him that I was working on the book, and he just texted back like, awesome, how now I just never talked to either one of you. Something like that. Because we wrote the whole book in 7 weeks. Really fast.
That is wild.
That's really fast. And I'm, I tend to do writing projects quickly, but that's really like beyond. So he was super supportive. And then my husband also was, a maker of space and a giver of time and a learner about Taylor Swift songs in the middle of the night when he might have rather been sleeping. So definitely, I would say we had a kind of full court press of support with our families and with our friends.
Wow, that's even more impressive that you managed to accomplish all of that in 7 weeks.
And I will say, that's like turning in the thing. We spent a lot more time with it when it came to like proofs and illustration and design, and like talking about all the things that have to happen to get it on the shelf was such a bigger, we kind of had to push so that we could release to all of the other parts of the process that have to happen. Even sometimes being like, I know we already designed, the book, and can we swap out this reference for that reference if we make it exactly the same amount of space? We kind of had fun throwing it all, all the pieces together and making this beautiful thing. Was so exciting to see it happen, and kind of the most condensed writer's retreat, but at home kind of way.
Yeah. Yes. And just having all of those chances to work with the team, and our illustrator, Bethany, who's so incredible. And her prints, she has a shop called Spilt Milk Press. She has amazing Taylor Swift prints and all kind of pop culture prints. Let me see if there's a particular illustration that I can show, maybe backwards. I don't know how this records, but so wait a second. So for example, here's our fairy tale era. So we had just an incredible designer, an incredible illustrator. The whole team is amazing. Their names are all in the back of the book. And it was just such a joy to work with each of them on all the different aspects of the project.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I was very impressed by all of the illustration as well. Like, it really sort of brought everything together in a visual way. And I love the way you did quotes in sort of a script font, and there was just a lot of visual interest to the book itself.
Yes, I think everyone really jumped in and said, yes, and did the other elements of, to us, we had a Microsoft document, and then suddenly it was like these whimsical illustrations in the margins that felt so correct. And I think we both just were thrilled by that.
Yeah. We at the Gilmore Way always approve of notes in the margins. But as you were putting it together, what was your target audience for this book? What were you hoping that Swifties were going to take away from it? And what were you hoping that maybe lovers of literature were going to take away from it? Just to, again, crossing over into learning about something that you didn't before. What were you hoping to get? And what was your target audience? Who are you still hoping to reach?
I think there's a lot of crossover between readers and Swifties, and giving Taylor Swift's lyrics the literary treatment was just such a dream, because taking them seriously as literature, taking something that's really popular that a lot of people like seriously as literature is like the name of my whole game. And so giving folks who love these songs and love these lyrics a way to think about them as an active, living, breathing part of literary history, And to do that by reading them as literature, by making connections to other literary texts, and then also, connecting the lyrics to books they love, but then also discovering maybe texts they haven't yet read that they'll love. We have recommended reading lists as well as like motif playlists. So there's a lot of indexing toward just like taking pleasure in art and recommendations that the book, that are all over the book. It's also for the literary lover who maybe is not a Swiftie yet, or is like Swift curious, or loves a Swiftie and wants a way in. The lyrics are so, I knew they would hold up to what we were doing, but I was blown away by how much there was to discover. And so it's also a kind of entryway into the music as well through this kind of literary lens.
I think it was important to us that everyone feel invited to the party. We talk about it in that intro moment was so crucial to us to capture it perfectly of, if you've been here forever, welcome. If you just got here, welcome. If you're not sure this is for you, welcome. And come hang out and see what you can find, because I bet there's something in there that appeals, one way or another.
Yeah, that's one of the things I did appreciate about the tone of the book was it treated the subject matter seriously, but with a little bit of humor in there, because Taylor herself is very funny. And, you guys definitely picked up on that and infused the book with that same humor. Like, for example, I think it's in Stay, 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 you came in wearing a football helmet. This is an example of foreshadowing. It's just so perfect and such a great meta reference. So, you have it where you're treating Taylor as a serious writer, but you have that space to be cheeky as well in a book like this. And I giggled so many times being like, oh my God, that was great. But spinning off of what Rachel said, just all of the connections that were made. Did you guys have any particular favorites where you stumbled across a discovery and you were like, oh my God, I never got that before, but now my head has exploded? Like, what's some of your favorite moments from this process where those light bulbs went off?
I muted Tiffany because you have such good ones.
I saw you mute. I was like, she knows exactly where my brain has gone. The first one that comes to mind is Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, which as a theater nerd, I was like, okay, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? No way. But then if we kind of look at it, it's like, well, Elizabeth Taylor, this is all kind of in the Taylor Swift universe of references, so maybe. And I pulled out the script to kind of look at it and see what might be there that I didn't remember from the last time I read it. And early in maybe the first couple scenes, there's a line where she mentions where that character mentions Dylan Thomas. You just have this Dylan Thomas thing about you that gets me right where I live, I think is the line. And I stood up. I mean, Tortured Poets just come out. Who's Afraid of Little Me's on that one, and Tortured Poets where we mentioned Dylan Thomas. And I was like, oh, it's all right there. Like, this has got to be, a source of what we're talking about here, which was really exciting. And then the other one is the little invisible string one that we love so much, where of course there's invisible string on folklore, and we know, and Jane Eyre and the invisible string between you and me, that what's the end of it, Rachel? Do you have it?
Yeah, I have it. Here, one second. Okay, so I will have it in a moment. We have the phrase invisible string in this book a lot. It's Jane Eyre to Mr. Rochester. I have a strange feeling with regard to you, as if I had a string somewhere under my left ribs, tightly knotted to a similar string in you. And then Jane continues the metaphor to express that she would die if the string were to break, declaring her deep connection a lifeline bound by fate.
So we have this, uses the main metaphor in invisible string where it's talked about so much. And then we have later in Peter.
I have it.
Thank you.
Here's the full. So we have my ribs get the feeling she did. And then we give you the full quote. I have a strange feeling with regard to you, as if I had a string somewhere under my left ribs, tightly knotted in a similar string in you. And if you were to leave, I'm afraid that cord of communion would snap. And I have a notion that I'd take to bleeding inwardly. As for you, you'd forget me. And so we have this dark, like, callback.
So, Peter, and it kind of ties those songs together in this really beautiful way where maybe they were never meant to be tied together by an invisible string, but they are in their metaphor, which was really one where I think I stood up at the desk and then called Rachel and was like, you won't believe it.
I'll add one more. I have so many favorites. It's really hard to pick. But the one I'll add is in Invisible. There's a line like shadows in a faded light. And we thought, is that Plato? Could that be Plato? And our wonderful editor said, I buy it. People read Plato. They read classical philosophy in high school. Let's leave it. Let's leave it for now. And then when later we got, in So High School, You Know How to Ball, I Know Aristotle. And that kind of reference back to like reading classical philosophy in high school as this thing that one does, it really made the Plato one pop. And there were just so many moments like that where we would say, Tiffany would say, I think this could be Cassandra. Is this Cassandra? I'm getting Cassandra. Do you see it? And Tortured Poets really was just like this answer to so many questions that we had. So that idea of really like sitting and living with a text and the text kind of changing, you're thinking about a text changing over time is just such a key part of really any literary analysis and something that we see across the discography in really fascinating ways.
Do you think that there was one particular author, playwright, or poet that she just constantly goes back to or draws upon the most? And who would you say that person is?
You go first, Deb. I want to see if you have the same answer.
The one that comes to mind is Emily Dickinson. I think there were so many where we were like, oh, it's not just kind of this undercurrent, of Emily Dickinson starting, early on and continuing all the way through beyond what maybe is, deemed, folklore and evermore. So Dickinson, it's everywhere.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. There are texts like the works of J.M. Barrie, Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass, that whole kind of universe of texts. The Great Gatsby is a huge one. Scarlet Letter, these texts and kind of bodies of text that come up again and again, and that there are so many different allusions to, and sometimes even these shifting understandings of across the songs. But Dickinson has a different place where once in a while, maybe we have something that feels like a direct reference to Emily Dickinson, but really more what is captured is this sense of poetess poetics, I would say, this feeling that there is this role for the poet to capture emotional experience, to capture women's experiences or kind of femme-coded experiences, to speak to a broad and diverse collective from this space of being, writing things that are deeply, deeply personal, that's also Gothic and it's haunted and it's engaged with literary history and just that whole sort of, Dickinson wasn't famous in her lifetime as a poetess. There were lots of figures, literary figures, poetesses who were very famous and had achieved transatlantic fame in the period. And Dickinson herself was better known as a gardener during her lifetime. But now that she's such a huge figure in American letters, looking back on her, we really see her poetry as kind of in this tradition. And then, of course, we got to learn that news about Taylor Swift being related to Emily Dickinson broke while we were working on the book, which felt like a gift from the universe. Also, the idea that there's not just literary inheritance, but actually a familial connection.
Yeah, just add it to the list of things I didn't know until experiencing the book and the novel. And it's just a wonderful thing that I think probably Taylor Swift even drew upon herself just as she's going through it, relating back to all of that. But on top of playwrights, poets, authors that she's drawing upon, what motif or theme do you think is most important to Taylor that you see woven into her lyrics right and left?
It's hard to choose just one. Maiden in the Tower imagery was really fascinating. And the Maiden in the Tower is such a complicated figure in literary history. So, sometimes it's this kind of fairy tale figure who is awaiting rescue. Sometimes it's a kind of romantic Juliet balcony scene moment. Sometimes it's a more dark, twisted isolation, as in Tennyson's The Lady of Shalott. And we saw all these variations on the Maiden in the Tower, kind of across the songs, which is really just such an interesting way to think about pop music also, and celebrity in general, I think kind of refracted through that literary image. So that might be the one I'd choose, although it's not the only one, but it's the one that springs to mind.
I think that one is the one that, reaches from the very beginnings all the way to Torture Poets. It's so present in this most recent album that it was kind of a stark contrast of this like golden fairy tale version to this kind of dark, scary, I'm locked in a tower and I'm losing my mind version, which was really interesting to pick apart kind of across the years.
Totally.
Now, Rachel, with you being a literary professor, have you incorporated this into your teachings and how you educate young people? And if so, what has their response been like?
Oh, well, so I taught that Tortured Poets class that I mentioned. But we talked about Taylor Swift a little, but it was really a lyric theory seminar. It was more like a clever, first day conversation. And we were reading a lot of poetry from across many different literary periods, and we were reading a lot of theoretical texts, but that was fun. It was a fun kind of element. Right now, I'm teaching a 19th century poetry class where the students actually this coming week are giving presentations on contemporary poets and bringing the contemporary poets into conversation with the 19th century figures we've been learning about in class. And I have two students who teamed up and picked Taylor Swift as their poet. So that will be really special to hear how they can connect Swift's lyrics to Romantic era and Victorian verse. But I would really love to do just like a true Taylor Swift class. There's one that's happening right now, or maybe it's wrapping up soon at Trinity University in San Antonio, and I got to go out and visit and do kind of a guest spot in the class and give a talk on Swiftie poetics. And this class that my colleagues are running there is just like so beautiful and wonderful. And the textbook that they're using, which one of them co-edited, is this new book of literary essays about Taylor Swift called The Literary Taylor Swift. So I sort of I'll shout out that book, and then I also want to kind of copycat that class. I think my students would love it and bring just a full literary approach to Taylor to the classroom.
Adding that to my to be read.
Yeah,
which is
shout
ever
out
growing.
to Betsy. It's great. Yeah.
Well, because it's interesting. We have an English professor and an actor and singer, so someone very well versed in the theatrical and musical worlds. And you both seem to have such an appreciation for Taylor and her songwriting. So, like, what are some of your favorite parts about Taylor's craft and her performance of these things? Like, what really draws you to her and makes you such a Swiftie?
I mean, I think it's always going to end and begin with storytelling. I think that she is our, one of our great storytellers, and that's what we seek to do in music, what we seek to do in theater, in literature, in all of these ways. We're just telling stories over and over again in different ways. And I think what excites me as a listener and as a performer is when there are lyrics that you're hearing a different way the next time you listen to it. that there's actually three ways you can think about that lyric, depending on who you're talking to and depending on what she means and depending on where the comma is, which we don't really know, and that's where you can find great fun in saying, well, what if we think about it this way? What if we think about it that way? And that really aligns with musical theater and all, music. And it's really great to explore that.
Yeah. Yeah. As a writer, I'm always wanting to create something that makes the reader feel seen and that they're in this conversation with me, that something is happening where they can be fully present and they, if they're not reflected directly by the text, they feel, welcomed and seen, and it feels like a connective act. And I guess that's what I'm going for in the classroom as well. And so I just love how Taylor Swift's music has done that on this grand scale. And, especially as someone who does teach at the college level. So I'm working with young people, they like, my students stay the same age. They're always in this kind of, they're going away to college. I mean, they come from different points in their lives, and some of them are older, some of them are younger, but they're all sort of starting this journey of higher education, or they're finishing this journey of higher education, and just seeing how many of them really find themselves in Taylor Swift songs and feel a part of a community that that's created by the music is just so impressive and beautiful to witness.
Do you think that other artists in the mainstream with Taylor who are on the same perhaps level of popularity as she currently is would benefit from doing what she's done and drawing on these literary works? And do you kind of wish that you saw that more from artists who are popular in this day and age?
I think there's a lot in a lot of people's lyrics. This is the one I've spent the time with and that we, really spent all the research on, but you can see a lot of literary figures. They're just, and motifs and allusions are just kind of a part of our vernacular. It's something that we use, and you may not even know, that all roads lead to is all roads lead to Rome, just those kinds of little sayings. And we try to kind of suss out some of them and talk about them, but we're always referencing, in our art. And I think there's a lot out there that maybe once you attune to, you can kind of hear in other lyrics. I'm sure I'm not as deep of a dive on the other ones, so I can't say, in that regard, but I think it's out there, and I don't, I think she is particularly academic in her writing, but that's not to say that someone else isn't, that I'm not as well versed on.
Well, this is why she's Dr. Swift.
And literature and music and art is always happening in different ways and in different registers all the time. And I don't think it's a competition to be, I mean, maybe to some working artists, it is a competition to be like the most popular. But from a scholarly perspective, you have someone like John Keats, who is widely regarded as one of the most groundbreaking, incredible poets of all time. But his reviews were not that good. He lived a short life. He did not, he didn't see his fame or the influence that he would have, 200 years later. Someone like Felicia Hemans, who's not exactly his contemporary now, I'll be fact checking myself in my brain, but like roughly from the same period, is not someone my students have heard of, but was incredibly successful as a poet. So, kind of fame rises and falls. And different types of writing are in vogue or in style in different periods. And there's always variation and, originality and uniqueness and that kind of thing. The fame and the kind of broad community and the success is like one part of it. But I think if fewer people liked Taylor Swift, Tiffany and I would both still really like Taylor Swift. So, it's just I think there are myriad ways that art is happening all the time. And I'm certainly not one to give advice to pop singers on how to make their art or run their business, but it's so wonderful for us that there's so much out there to explore.
Yeah. Well, we are a Gilmore Girls podcast, theoretically. And Tiffany, word on the street is you have watched the show, but Rachel, you have not?
I am, as someone recently said to me about Taylor Swift, not a Gilmore Girls fan yet. I just haven't.
Correct.
Yeah. So I'm going to mute though, and Tiff, I'll let you take it away.
No, I can deeply say that you're gonna love it, Rachel. When you get around to it, it's gonna be great. No, definitely, I would say it's my comfort show. It's my I can't sleep at 2 in the morning. So the only thing that will slow my brain down is if someone else talks faster than me, and that's when I have to turn on Lorelai. Uh, and so yeah, so I'm pretty much through another rewatch at this point. I've got my husband Rachel's brother in mid-season 2. This is really huge for my household. Yeah, it's great.
Because when I was reading this book, there were so many names and references that came up that I was like, they referenced that in Gilmore Girls. They referenced that in Gilmore Girls. That connects to this. Jess is such a rake. And so did you have similar moments going through? And like, do you see a lot of overlap or interplay between the two things?
I think that they are very, you could say one is coded of the other, that it all kind of exists in a very similar Venn diagram of things. I think Amy Sherman Palladino is an amazing writer, and, she references so much literature, classics, musicals, plays, like that show. The writing is so detailed and quick and jams all these references in just like this. And in a lot of ways, it's very similar to Taylor Swift, because once you start catching them, then you catch them. But if you don't know what they're saying, it just kind of passes you by. There's things that are said in the show where I'm like, I don't know that reference, but I'm sure it's great. Whatever you just referenced, I'm sure it's hilarious and correct. But yeah, I think that's what those shows kind of have in common. And there's like a youthful earnestness about them, in a really pure way that I think is makes it such a great comfort show.
Yes,
I guess
and
I could say it's a little bit like a Bildungsroman.
Yes.
You sure could.
You sure could. You sure could. Yes, and I shouldn't say that I haven't watched it all, because when I was writing about rake figures for my book, the Darcy Myth, which is about kind of the rake archetype and the Gothic and romantic tropes and that kind of thing, Tiffany did. I think I dipped into a couple of episodes, so there was a brief homework assignment, and I am sure I will love it. I love the vibe and the aesthetic, but I haven't. I do know that Jed is watching, but I have not taken the deep dive yet.
Yeah, but I will say I think you will also very much appreciate Rory's character, just from her being such an avid book lover and just reading so many of the authors that you probably teach every single day. So I think there's going to be a lot for you to relate to there.
Love it. I'll circle back. I'll update you in the future.
We will be waiting on bated breath.
We'll have to do this again in another year once you've had a chance to watch the whole show and be like,
Once
okay, now we have all these.
But Tiffany, just some follow-up questions for you. Do you have a favorite episode or season of the show, favorite characters? Just talk to us a little bit more about what you appreciate about Gilmore.
Gosh, I think that I think what I love the most is how quick the dialogue is, the relationship between, the mother and daughter, and kind of those moments. The episode that actually I hesitate to say is my favorite, but is maybe one of the most emotionally poignant, is when maybe it's season 1, when Rory and Dean fall asleep at Miss Patty's, and Emily's there, and the whole mother-daughter generational conflict happens. I just think it's one of those that's painful to watch, but it's so well done, I think, and always one that I'm like, stop everything, we just have to watch it.
Yeah. What team are you on? We got to know.
Yeah.
If any.
I don't know if I'm on any. I know, but I just don't feel like, I guess maybe Jess, but I don't know. They all have their problems.
That they do.
They do indeed.
They do.
We're not gonna argue that one. But as a team Jess stan, I appreciate your support today.
Thank you. Thank you so
And
much.
as a Team Logan stan, we can't be friends.
I'm just getting to that part of the series again, so maybe then my heart will change.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But maybe bouncing back to Taylor Swift just a little bit. Favorite album of hers, and what era would you say that you're currently in right now in March of 2025?
I've been listening to
It
Reputation a
feels
lot.
Gee, I wonder why.
the best. The best. I think that I'm probably in my I think I'm in my fearless era at this moment in time. That's
Love
just like kind of
that.
the vibe.
No, I want to be in my Fearless era. I'm sorry for
Yeah.
Reputation. I'm joining you in Fearless.
Join me in Fearless. It's nice here. Glittery and gold.
Yeah. I think lately I've been a little bit more in my Midnight's era, just because I love how visceral and how dark and biting she can get towards people who have wronged her. And I'm kind of here for that right now. Just, speak up about people who have done you dirty. So that's currently where I'm at. But Kate?
I'm in an interesting middle discography place where there are some days where I'm like reputation, decadence, badassery, and other days I'm more lover. Like I'm, about to get married in a few weeks, and so there's a lot of sentimentality. Thank you. Yeah, just some of that romance and the sentimentality of that album, and the fact that my fiance is English, so London Boy is an obvious.
There you go.
So,
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. But any other final takeaways from your book writing process? And what do you really want to make sure that you're leaving anyone who picks up a copy of this book with? What is your ultimate goal for anyone who is opening this book, starting from page 1 by the time they get to the end of it?
Yeah. Literary history is happening all the time. We've said it before. I'll say it again. Literary history happens when you read a classic, in a course with a teacher. It happens when a novel wins a prestigious prize. It happens when, an author has a new idea, but it also happens when you're scream singing in your car. It happens when you're playing your comfort music in the background. It's always happening. And the way that we consume text and we consume music and we consume art and we make meaning around it is just so crucial to who we are and to what we share with each other. That's funny. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
I think, we talk in the modernism era around red, the idea of making it new. And I think that's what I hope people walk away with if they're coming to the book, most likely probably knowing a lot of these songs and having a certain preconceived notion of each of these songs, and also the narrator and the writer, that they come away with something new, and that something new can ignite joy and sparkle and a new excitement about something that maybe had been in your drawer a while. Maybe you pull out debut and give it a new listen and find it fresh again.
I love that.
You too.
But yeah, we just wanted to say thank you so much for your time and sitting down with us to talk about this book. It really is extraordinary. I will continue to go back to it as Taylor continues to put out more material, I'm sure. So if you ever wanted to do a part 2, I mean, she's always going to be churning out more lyrics for you to just break down. So I'm here for that.
We'll get with you again after TS 15 and be like, okay, here's a part 2 to this book.
I'll hold it up. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us and for the intellectual engagement and for reading the book and loving the book. And it's just been such a pleasure to hang out with you and get to know you at long last.
Thank you.
Right back
Absolutely. Yep. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And we'll just say again, go pick up a copy of this book if you have not already. You will not be disappointed.
Thanks so much.
Any last words, anything you want to leave us with, or anywhere that you want to direct people to find you guys?
we're on the Instagram. If you want to find us there and hang out and see what's up. Mostly we hope that if you see the book, on a table on a bookshelf in your local bookstore, that you pick it up and take it home with you.
Yeah, I second that. And if you do, thank you so much for checking it out. We hope you enjoy it and find something in there that maybe you hadn't thought of or hadn't thought of in quite that way.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Oh my God, how fabulous was that?
That was the most fun I have had in a long, long time. I love all the episodes we do, but it is always so joyous when we can bring on other people to chat with us. And Tiffany and Rachel are just the kindest, most fun women I've had the pleasure of meeting. That was everything that I wanted it to be and more.
Yeah, same. The book's been out a couple months, and we've been trying to peg down a date that works for everybody with all of our crazy schedules, and like it was totally worth the wait. So, but we have a few more things to say about the book. I, in typical me fashion, made something like 70 pages of notes from it, and they're all color coordinated and formatted. So, there were just some more Gilmore related things that I picked up on that I wanted to add here as well, and just go over the substance of the book, I guess, a little bit more. We really wanted to hear from Tiffany and Rachel about their process and their feelings about Taylor and the analysis of her work. But we also have a few more like Gilmore adjacent things to squeeze in here. So I'll just start off by saying, like, they start off the book, obviously. They work through it chronologically with Taylor Swift, the self-titled album. And they discuss how it's her Bildungsroman era. And so for those who haven't read the book yet, which you better, it's a foundation novel. It's growing up. It's going from naivety to experience and self-actualization. It's finding your place in the world. And it runs through a lot of Taylor's work, but it's also sort of foundational for Rory herself. Rory has to come of age and go out into the world and figure out her strengths and her weaknesses. And, the world is not always going to be a kind place to her. And the heartbreak and the disillusionment and the growing pains are very much a centerpiece of mostly Rory's story, but you see a little bit of it with Lorelai as well. She may be in her early 30s, but she's still growing up a lot as well. So I thought that there was some interesting correlations there, that you could view Gilmore Girls like a Bildungsroman, and you could look at these references to youth and naivety and teenage heartbreak in Taylor's work and connect it right back to Gilmore.
Yeah, and it really makes me want to hit just Rory's own personal reading list and go back to it, because now that I know that there are these connections here from Taylor's lyrics into some of the books that Rory just goes back to time after time after time again, it makes me want to revisit them and see what could Rory Gilmore even learn from these novels had she been listening to Taylor at the time. I'm sure she would have been making a lot of these connections as well. And it's just so fascinating to have the opportunity to revisit our favorite show and revisit some of our favorite literary works just through an entirely fresh and new lens. And we would never have been able to have that opportunity if it were not for this wonderful book that Tiffany and Rachel have put together. So I just love that I will be able to do that in the coming weeks and coming months. And I'm just really excited to see what my new takeaways are.
Yeah, we had those. Well, technically it was supposed to be 2 episodes, and then it turned into 4 episodes, going through the entire plot of the show as if it were Taylor Swift songs. And that was such a fun exercise, and it was surprisingly easy to do, to find all of those connections. But this book even went further and made even more connections that I hadn't made before. And so I love that about it. But just one last thing on the Bildungsroman thing is, they have a line under Picture to Burn, which is obviously from Self-Titled. And they mention the loss of innocence and how it's realizing it's much more difficult. Life is much more difficult and less fair than the stories we hear in childhood might lead us to believe. And I literally put a little parenthetical right next to that. Very Rory Gilmore coded. It's just, learning that life is not the insulated bubble of Stars Hollow is core to Rory's progression through the show. And so it was just interesting seeing all these sort of these lyrics that Taylor wrote when she was between something like 12 and 15 years old, and how even though that was maybe a couple years after Rory went through that same process, you see these similar motifs popping up in life for young American teenage girls.
Yeah, and it's also just so transparent and vivid for me as well to see how her lyrics just correlated to her relationships. I mean, loving you was red. I feel like that can apply to any one of Rory's partners. We've talked about before why all of them are hits and misses, but there's just so much that I think is relatable between Taylor's relationships with men, how some of them floundered over time, and how that parallels to when Rory's boyfriends don't work out for her and when some of her relationships fall apart. So it's just really been so eye-opening to experience. And there's just so much more that we can say that we haven't even said, but we're not going to keep you here for 6 hours. But it's been truly a breath of fresh air to just revisit everything through a completely different lens. I can't stress enough how much I've just appreciated doing that the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, they said something in the intro to the Fearless section. This is the sort of the fairy tale era, if you will. And they mentioned a childhood steeped with stories. And once again, that made me think of Rory. And it put all of this into a new light. We've talked about the potential impact of Rory's reading as a kid on her development, both intellectually and morally. But maybe we probably have more depths to plumb on that one. But I just thought it was such an interesting connection because I think Taylor was very much probably like Rory as a kid, where she was just constantly reading and writing and engaging with words and language in such a way that these kinds of devices and archetypes and stories completely shaped the way they thought about themselves and the world. And so, if Rory is out there crap talking Taylor Swift, she needs to take a closer look and figure out that there's maybe not so much of a gap between them. I think they have a lot of overlap and interest in romanticism and language and, all of these different kinds of stories and Shakespeare and poetry and Dylan Thomas and all of these things. I don't think they're as far apart as you might expect. The Gilmore women are kind of iconoclastic, like their creators. And, I think it goes to show that sometimes being popular doesn't mean something is vapid or unintellectual. I think it actually makes what Taylor does that much more impressive, that she can take these things that are so complex and turn them into something that you want to crank the volume up on when you're jamming out in your car.
Yeah. And I think Rory Gilmore would honestly have a really wonderful and just intellectual sit down with Taylor Swift if that could ever happen in an alternate reality. Because I just think back to her graduation speech when she draws upon and alludes to the authors and people in her life that have shaped her. Taylor's doing the exact same thing when she brings in all of these literary nods into her lyrics. You're just acknowledging people and songwriters and poets and playwrights that have shaped you, that are just now altering your life for better, for worse, who are shaping what you do and what you can and will do moving forward. So there's a lot of similarities there, even if Rory might never want to actually own up to that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've gone over a lot of the specifics in our previous episodes as we've done the sort of literary analysis of the lyrics themselves. But I love the way that they took this broader view and they made all these connections between songs as well. We were able to do a bit of that, but just seeing all of the different allusions to things, like Taylor has so many allusions to The Great Gatsby, for example. And, there's class tension in that, the old money, the new money, the pining for an old love, the looking for the light across the dock as a symbol from an ex-lover that they're still thinking about you. All of those kind of things really make me think of Rory and Jess especially, and the the crashing of the car. Spoiler alert for Gatsby if you haven't read it yet, but there is a pretty dramatic car crash. And, what else has a pretty dramatic car crash? I mean, there's no vehicular homicide happening or vehicular manslaughter going on in Gilmore Girls, but, just all of these sort of, like, they both call back so much to these seminal works of literature that most of us had to read in high school or university, and just seeing all of the interplays between things and how people are inspired by a lot of the same things, but how it can kind of come out so differently. It's just fascinating to me how much room there is to play with all of this. It makes me want to read every book on my shelf. I have so many of the books from Marie's reading list, among others, obviously, but just, reading through their book made me want to pull every poem that they talked about, or grab my copy of Frankenstein off the shelf, or go back to Gatsby, go back to Alice in Wonderland, and just explore all of these things even more deeply so that I can understand Taylor more deeply and Gilmore Girls more deeply.
Yeah. And I will just thank again Tiffany and Rachel all day, every day for just how comprehensive this was. They really pull from every album and from every song, and they highlight for you, this is a nod in this song to this particular work of art. But also go back to page 171 for additional context here, because there's just so much overlap. And I will just echo what you said. It makes me want to revisit all of these books and see what can I take away from it that I probably would have never really appreciated or ever picked up on before.
Yeah, there were so many things that were popping to my head as I was reading through this. I feel like 90% of the literary references and things that they went through in this also kind of come up in Gilmore Girls. Like, they discussed Sylvia Plath multiple times. Hey, did anyone ever think that maybe Sylvia Plath wasn't crazy? She was just cold. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, it's a real shame Elizabeth Barrett Browning wasn't alive to see this. She put her head through a wall. The Gatsby references are maybe a little more indirect. The Shakespeare references to Romeo and Juliet, specifically when it comes to Gilmore Girls. I'm trying to think of like what other ones. Dylan Thomas, as previously mentioned. There are just so many that, like, there's so much overlap in all of this that, Oscar Wilde was mentioned a few times. Was it Lorelai saying to her dad maybe, or somebody, where it's like, there's a portrait of you in the attic that Dorian Gray is consulting copyright lawyers about. Just things like that, where these things all play off each other. And I think, understanding the source works helps us understand the music and the show. But conversely, the music and the show can inspire us to want to turn to the source material and inform it and cast a new light on it as well. The intertextuality between these things, they continue to be in dialogue with each other across years and time and space and even medium. Like, it's kind of wild to me how all of this stuff connects back to each other. And it was just such a pleasure to listen to somebody, both like personally here, meeting them in person and having that discussion, but also hearing their thoughts in the book itself, just listening to someone go on about it when it's something you love, and pointing out things that you didn't know before. Like, I didn't do an English degree. My degree is in politics, and I was forced to take 2 English literature courses, and it was kind of like pulling teeth. But now, as I get older, I'm starting to understand these things more. I'm learning them in different contexts, and it's making me more interested in it. So while this text was very understandable and accessible to me, there were some things that I learned, like some new terms like epizoixis, repetition for the sake of emphasis, which I think happens again in both Taylor Swift and Gilmore Girls. It's just, it was fun to revisit something that I maybe didn't love when I was younger and kind of felt like I had to do for the sake of school, in a way that was a lot more fun to me.
Yeah. And that's really what they've done with this book. it's scholarly, but it's not something that is going to just have you go into it and feel like it's above what you're capable of absorbing if you're not a literary scholar or professor. It is still just very well, I guess, written and spelled out for you so that it's not going to dumb it down, but it's also not going to make you feel like it's beyond a basic person's level of comprehension who may not be as familiar with these works. So I really appreciated that medium as well.
And there were even some things in the book that explained to me or connected directly to the show some of these references. For example, this is Tolerate It. There's a lyric, now I'm begging for footnotes in the story of your life, which they pointed out parallels a quote from journalist Martha Gellhorn, who is also remembered as Ernest Hemingway's ex-wife. I was a writer before I met him, and I have been a writer for 45 years. Why should I be a footnote in someone else's life? And this reminds me of season 5 when Logan and Rory are having that fight about, what about Hemingway? What about him? Trusted that wife of his with the only copy he had of the novel he was working on. The silly woman lost it. Not so. I know the story. Hemingway left it on a plane. His wife had nothing to do with it. So just that whole story, I'm like, Martha Gellhorn. I wasn't expecting that to come up, and yet there it was, right on a silver platter for me to understand the reference in the show that much better.
Yeah. And she really goes and runs the gamut from start to finish in terms of what she's calling upon, which I think Rory again would also appreciate, because she goes back to Greek tragedy and Greek playwrights, and you get that. So it's, you know, not even anything where it's just the past couple of decades. She really goes far back in time and history. And I'll have to echo something that Rachel said when we were speaking with her, that history is happening all the time. And it truly is. And that evolution is something that I think we see play out so much within the book, and how Taylor can allude to it. And it's just something that I think Rory is also really learning as she moves forward as well, that things are always changing and adapting. And so that was a really awesome takeaway. But she's still calling on things that are just happening here and now. You know, Patti Smith, Manson, you know, things that are just a little bit more knowledgeable and familiar to us in this day and age. So it's not just go all the way back in time and stay there. It's just really span all of history.
Yeah. Here's another fun connection. The lyric from Evermore, Ever and Evermore, and, you know, talking about how 19th century poets would use it, evermore and forevermore, to express timelessness or something eternal. And obviously, he's got at least 5 Nevermores to go. At least if I brought a flask, we could have played the Nevermore drinking game.
No, but again, just I have struggled with some of these books sometimes in my life in terms of just not enjoying them. Fitzgerald was always really difficult for me. I never really loved The Great Gatsby, but now it just makes me want to go back and read it again and see, like, is there an appreciation for this book that I'm not going to have before? And I think Rory would support doing that as well. Sometimes you need a second or third go around with a book to really understand what the author was trying to convey or tell you.
Yeah. Another thing I love that they did with this book was the sort of the Swifties Guide to Tortured Poets, and they would have a little bit of an explanatory biographical vignette. And, you know, there's one for Sylvia Plath and Robert Lowell and Christina Rossetti and Keats, I think. And, you know, Sylvia Plath's name comes up multiple times, as I've kind of already alluded to. You're going to a Chilton party? Honey, why don't you just stay home and read the Bell Jar? Same effect.
Oh, boy.
You know, just, you know, it all connects back to each other. It's full circle, shall we say.
Yeah. And there's always a lot of coming of age that happens in her writing, and what we see with Rory. I feel like when we start off in some of Taylor's with some of her early albums, she's still trying to figure out who she is in life and who she's going to be as a songwriter. And I think there's still a lot of that youth that you see in her earlier lyrics, because she's going through a lot of what we see Rory experiencing in those early seasons. You know, what relationships and boys are going to look like for her in her life when things don't work out well, when life throws you tumultuous situations and you have to make career choices. There's so much overlap there between what I think we see again with Taylor's early albums and Rory in the early seasons, and then how Taylor has matured now in some of her later albums that we get as she has moved into her 20s and 30s, and how her lyrics have changed to represent that this is now a much more mature woman who knows what she wants in life. And I think Rory still needs to get there quite a bit. Where we leave her off in the revival, I don't think she's as grounded or as concrete in her life as Taylor is now, but they're both maturing and changing and adapting and using the intellect that they can draw from all of these sources to help them do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could say a gajillion more things about this book. Like I said, I have dozens and dozens of pages of notes, but I think a lot of it does tie back to things we've talked about before in the more granular analysis we've done in the past. So I'll leave it off with this, which is a quote from the afterword that they call the manuscript in their book. The greatest story is the messy, nonlinear, deeply flawed, and complex tale of what it means to be human. And I think that really sums up Gilmore Girls. Messy, nonlinear, deeply flawed.
You know what? It is what it is, but it needs to be said, and you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for.
I think it's deeply flawed on purpose. I'm not saying that it's a bad show. I'm saying it's meant to be this sort of realistic slice of life of, things are not always a straight upward trajectory. Sometimes you climb to a great height and then have hurdles and stumbles and falls. Rory's certainly had her fair share. So life is not a fairy tale for Taylor or for anybody in the Gilmore universe. But I thought that was a very poignant way to wrap up sort of, I guess, how a lot of these stories in our own lives and in literature and in Taylor's universe are ever evolving, and storytelling is really at the heart of what we do here, both here on this podcast and here on Earth. I think, just the deep history of storytelling, all the way from the oral storytellers of the past to the origins of writing, and from scribes and manuscripts and religious writings, all the way through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment age of just more and more putting words on a page, putting stories on a page to preserve and to share. It's just so much of what it means to be human, to share stories like that, to share experience and an understanding with the world. And I think, it's a useful endeavor. And I think both Taylor Swift and Gilmore Girls do it spectacularly. I'm waxing real poetic now, guys. I'm sorry, but it's
okay. I mean, that's kind of the crux of this week's conversation. So wax on, wax off.
Yeah, that's a reference from the show too, if memory serves.
It is indeed. But case in point, we will say again, if you have not picked up a copy of this book, please go get one. You will not be disappointed. This is the most wonderful read that we've had in quite some time, and we were just so excited to talk with Tiffany and Rachel about it. We'll include some links in the description below where you can go to get a copy of it. And if you have any thoughts about it after you read it or have already read it, please feel free to drop your hot takes or medium takes, whatever it is, in the description box below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Or your mild takes, all degrees of spiciness are welcome here.
Yeah.
Anyway, that wraps us up for this week. But, some exciting things are happening in the Gilmore world because it is the 25th anniversary of our favorite show. And what better way to mark it than by attending FanFest in Guilford, October, 17th to 19th?
Yes.
Okay. And we've just had our first cast announcement. Our beloved Eris Alvarado will be joining us once more. This is only the first of many cast and crew announcements that she'll be following in the coming weeks. So make sure you get yourself to the Facebook planning group, the FanFest Society planning page. All of your questions can be answered there. If you still have more questions and you can't find an answer, we're here as experienced attendees. We like to think we're a resource for you if you've got questions about what happens and whether or not you should come. Spoiler alert, the answer is yes, you need to come. It's going to be awesome. Jenny always pulls out all the stops. And, with this year being an anniversary, I have this feeling in my soul that it's going to be epic. So you do not want to miss this.
Yep, and definitely don't wait on getting a ticket. They have not sold out yet, but they will as we get closer and closer to the day and the weekend of. So we will also include a link below where you can go and find out more info on the website, purchase a ticket for yourself. We want you there. And again, we promise that you will not be disappointed. So don't wait. It's Guilford, it's Connecticut in the fall. It feels exactly like Stars Hollow, and it's everything that we all need it to be.
Exactly. And there's also another cruise happening. They went on a cruise this past January it started in Fort Lauderdale, went to Key West, then through the Bahamas and back again. And unfortunately, we weren't able to attend, but all of the feedback was very positive. Everybody looked like they had a great time, and they've already announced the one for next year. I don't have the details to the top of my head, but keep an eye out for information on that. If you're interested on going on a celebrity cruise with cast and crew from Gilmore Girls, the information is out there. You can start putting down deposits for your desired room type. And then there's a payment plan, so you can pay a couple $100 each month, with the final balance being due, I think, in September for probably January, February next year, I think is the timeline again. So again, the website will be linked down below. The Facebook planning group will be linked down below. So get you that information and do one, do both. I don't think you'll be disappointed either way.
You most certainly will not be. You can create a pro-con list, but I feel like it'll just end up being all pros. So again, just check out the links below. We'll include that information there. Ask us a question if you need. You can always shoot us an email, and we're happy to fill you in on anything else you need to know. But we just look forward to seeing you in the fall in Connecticut. It's going to be a wonderful time.
Yeah. And on that note, forevermore, we'll see you next Friday for dinner.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.